Vetu, and furthermore, says the Gemara. Now, this furthermore is not really an additional question. This opens up for the next, daf and a half, however long it is, the whole sugya of aseh docha lo ta'aseh. Really, starting now, we're gonna get into the entire sugya. So we asked the question. We're not gonna come back to this question for another daf. Okay, tov. We're not gonna come back to this question for another like daf and a half or something. So we have to keep this question on the back burner. The question was, why does aseh docha lo ta'aseh apply to yibum? I mean, why would I? The question is really, why do I need this drasha? We have a drasha to tell me that you don't do yibum to one of the arayot. So the question is, what do you mean? Why do I need a drasha for that? Obviously, you don't do yibum, and don't tell me aseh docha lo ta'aseh. That's not true by something that has karet. Now the Gemara goes off on a tangent and gets into the whole background of aseh docha lo ta'aseh. So it's true this is really where we ended off. So we're going to try to go through this Amud rather quickly. So the Gemara says, Vetu lo ta'aseh greda, by a regular lo ta'aseh. You have a regular mitzvah aseh, a regular chiyuv, and a regular lo ta'aseh. Milalan dedachi. How do we know that the aseh overrides the lo ta'aseh? So says the Gemara, dichtiv, it says in the pasuk, lo tilbash shatnez. It says you cannot wear shatnez, tzemer upishtim yachtav. And then the next pasuk, right away, connected to it, it says gidilim ta'aselach. You have to put tzitzit on your beged. So v'amar, since those two psukim are connected to each other, we learn that even when you're going to be violating shatnez, in order to do the mitzvah of tzitzit, because you have to put techelet, and it has to be wool, and the beged might be linen, still we tell you to put shatnez, to mix the wool with the linen, to make tzitzit. From the fact that the pasuk of shatnez and tzitzit are right next to each other, we learn from there that even when the mitzvah of tzitzit would be overriding shatnez, meaning in order to fulfill the chiyuv of putting tzitzit on your beged, you're going to be overriding the isur of shatnez. So you have a mitzvah aseh to put tzitzit on the corner of your beged, right? A person he went to the store, he bought a beged that has 4 corners. He has a chiyuv to put tzitzit on it when he puts on the beged. But let's say this beged is linen, and the strings that he has to put include techelet, which is wool. So in order to do the mitzvah of tzitzit, he's going to have to violate shatnez. So we say the aseh of tzitzit overrides the lo ta'aseh of shatnez. Okay, tov. The aseh of tzitzit overrides the lo ta'aseh of shatnez, from the fact that these two psukim are next to each other. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, simuchin min Torah minayin. Rabbi Elazar says, how do we know we make such drashot of simuchin, of two things that are connected to each other? Where do we see this concept in that we make drashot of two psukim that were next to each other? Shneimar, it says in Tehillim, really, simuchim la'ad leolam asuyim be'emet v'yashar. So from that pasuk, we learn the concept of smuchim, of making a drasha, learning something from the fact that the Torah put two psukim directly next to each other. The Torah wrote the Isra of shatnez, right next to it put the mitzvah of tzitzit to teach me that tzitzit overrides shatnez. Well, how do we know we make such drashot? Because we have a pasuk, simuchim la'ad leolam asuim be'emet v'yashar. V'amarav sheshet. Okay, good. We're gonna get into it the next amud, but techelet, every tzitzit has to have on it techelet. Yeah. Right. So techelet, the Gemara says, is wool. Really, techelet is wool that's dyed a certain color. So if your beged is linen, and you're stitching the string of wool through it, you're making shatnez. Not every time a person wears tzitzit, but if he has a linen beged and he has to put wool strings on it, he's going to be violating shatnez to do the chiyuv of tzitzit. So the truth is, we're going to get more into it in the next amud tomorrow. So v'amar Rav Sheshet, amar Rabbi Elazar, mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, minayin li yevama shanafla lifnei mukei shechin she'en chosmin ota. So another type of drasha of smuchim, of two things that are right next to each other. He asks, how do we know that if a yevama, a woman, falls to yibum in front of someone who's a mukeshchin, he's a not good looking person. Shein chosminota. How do we know that we don't muzzle her? Means we don't like cover her mouth and tell her, listen, when you married your husband, you agreed to marry him, and in the fine print was also yibum. You just have to stick with it, and that's it. You can't no way out unless he does chalitza, but that's his choice. We don't do that. We force him to do chalitza. So how do we know this? Where does this come from? That if a woman says, "I'm not interested. He's ugly. I don't want to do yibum," we don't force her. How do we know that? Shneemar, because it says in the pasuk, "Lo tachsom shor bedisho," talks about an isur of muzzling an ox when he's plowing. You can't put a cover on his face. You have to let his face be open so that he'd be able to eat and whatever while he's plowing. And Vesamichle, and right next to it is the pasuk of Yibum, Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, when there's two brothers, they're living together, and one of them doesn't have a son, and he dies. There's Yibum. So, from the fact that right next to the mitzvah of Yibum is this isur of lo tachsom shor b'disho, don't put a muzzle over the ox's face when he's plowing. So we see from there that you don't muzzle the woman when she's not interested in doing Yibum. Same way you don't cover the ox's face. We're using that word in chosminota. We don't cover her mouth and muzzle her up. Rather, we listen to her claims and we say, okay, you know what? She's not interested. She's not interested. No yibum. Yeah, chalitza. So that's another example of smuchim, of making a drasha from two things that are right next to each other. V'amar Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef says, afilu leman de lo darish smuchim be'alma b'mishnah Torah darish. Even according to the opinion that regularly does not make a drasha of smuchim, meaning generally they do not make a drasha when two psukim are written right next to each other, but b'mishnah Torah in Sefer Devarim, they do. So the Gemara is going to later explain why is Sefer and Devarim any different. But we're saying for now, Sefer Devarim, we do make a drasha of smuchim according to everybody across the board. Now we're going to prove this. We're going to show that Rabbi Yehuda does not make a drasha of smuchim in other places, yet he still makes it in Mishnah Torah. So even the opinion that does not accept the drasha of smuchim elsewhere accepts the drasha of smuchim in Sefer Dvarim. So everyone will agree in Sefer Dvarim you make this drasha, and this pasuk of tzitzit is in Sefer Dvarim. The Rabbi Yehuda be'alma lo darish uv Mishnah Torah darish. Rabbi Yehuda generally in all other places in Chumash he doesn't make a drasha of smuchim, but by Mishnah Torah in Sefer Dvarim, right? Sefer Dvarim is called Mishnah Torah because a lot of things are repeated there. Mishnah really is repeating. It's like a second time, right? Mishneh Torah, it's reviewing Torah. So a lot of mitzvot are repeated in Sefer Dvarim. That's why it's called Mishneh Torah. It's Moshe Rabbeinu really speaking the entire time. Alma minalan de lo darish. So how do we know that regularly in all the first four Sfarim of Torah, in Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Rabbi Yehuda does not make a drasha of smuchim? So from the following discussion, Detanya, Ben Azai Omer, Neemar mechashefa lo techaye. Ben Azai says, the pasuk says mechashefa lo techaye. We have a chiyuv. There's a death penalty for mechashefa. What's a mechashefa? A sorcerer, a witch. So mechashefa lo techaye, the witch gets a death penalty. So what type of death penalty? So she gets skila. The question is, how do we get to skila? How do we get to skila? So Ben Azai says, very simple. It says mechashefa lo techaye v'neemar, and right away the next pasuk is kol shochevim behema mot yumat. Whoever sleeps with an animal mot yumat. So we learn that samchu inyan lo, they're smuchim, they're right next to each other. Ma shochevim behema biskila, just like if somebody is together with an animal, the punishment is skila. So af mechashefa biskila. So too mechashefa is with skila, also gets skila, because they're smuchim, they're right next to each other. So we learn, just like Mechashefa lo techaye kol shochev im behema mot yumat. So just like shochev im behema, someone who sleeps with an animal, is mot yumat is skila. So too mechashefa, which is right next to it, is also skila. So Rabbi Yehuda wasn't happy about this. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, v'chim im neshes samchu inyan lo notzi ze skila. What? Just because they're next to each other, you're going to transfer the punishment of skila to the other thing? Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't do that. I don't roll that way. I don't just do smuchim. Ella, rather, you know how I know mechashafa gets skila? Completely different avenue. Ovi de'oni bichlal mechashefim hayu. There are different types of sorcerers that are under the umbrella of mechashefa, under the umbrella of mechashefim, under the umbrella of sorcerers. One of them is ov, and one of them is yidoni. One of them, the Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about the difference between them. One of them, like some voice comes from their armpit. They like do some type of sorcery and make it seem like some sound is coming from their armpit. The other one, they put a bone in their mouth and they open their mouth and the bone starts talking. It's a big machlok at Rambam and Ramban whether there's actuality to these or it's just some type of sleight of hand and trickery. But um, either way, so Rabbi Yehuda says, you know how I know there's skila by mechashefa? Because Ov and Yidoni are really under the umbrella of mechashefa. They're really types of mechashefim. Vilama yatsu, and why is it that we have a separate pasuk specifically telling us about them? The pasuk says by Ov and Yidoni that they get skila. It says mot yumatu demehem bam, and that means skila. So why do they have their own pasuk? Why are they taken out of this umbrella of mechashefa, and we say that they get skila? Lahakish lahem. They're there to make a hekesh. Now this is one of the Yud Gimel Midot Shahat Torah Nidreshet Bahem. I'm going to explain in a minute. Lakish lahem velomar lecha. Ma ovi yidoni biskila. The same way that ov and yidoni, they get skila. Af mechashefa biskila. So too mechashefa, she also gets skila. So what's this principle over here? So we have um, a principle in the Yud Gimel Midot Shatonra in Reshet Bahem that says, Kol davar shaya bechlal, v'yatsa min haklal lelamed, anything that was included in some umbrella general category and was excluded, and it came to teach us something specific, lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa, it's not coming to teach about itself, ella lelamed al kol haklal kulo yatsa, it's coming to teach on the whole entire cloud. So Ov and Yidoni were under the umbrella of Mechashefa. They were excluded, and we said skila. So the skila that they're excluded to teach really relates back to the entire klal of mechashefa. So that's how we learn mechashefa is beskila. Rabbi Yehuda says not smuchim, not because it's next to something that has skila, but it's because we have one of the Yud Gimel Midot Torah Nidreshet Bahem that tells us that something was excluded here, and it's coming to teach on the entire klal that they get skila. Okay, so now it says the Gemara further, of Mishnah Torah Minalan de Darish. So fine, you showed me that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't accept smuchim. He didn't want to make this drush of smuchim, but how do we know that he does in Mishnah Torah? In Sefer Dvarim, he still agrees that you do make these drushot. Ditnan says, Nose Adam anusat aviv umfutat aviv, anusat beno umfutat beno. The Chachamim, Rabbanan here, hold in this Braita that let's say a person's father, he didn't marry a woman, but he was together with a woman out of wedlock. He either took advantage of the woman physically and raped her, or he seduced her and got her to agree to be with him. But the point is, he didn't marry a woman, but he was together with a woman. Is the son allowed to marry that woman? Or same way if a child, a boy, a son, was with a woman, is the father allowed to marry that woman? Or do we say, no, it's under the same umbrella as the father's wife. Just like you can't marry the father's wife, you can't marry anybody who the father was with, even if the father didn't marry. So that's the question here. So Chachamim say, no, you're allowed to. By Anusat Aviv or Mefutat Aviv, you're allowed to. Rabbi Yehuda, Oser. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's Asur. So we have to go a little bit faster just to get to the bottom of the Amud. So Rabbi Yehuda Oser Ba'anusat Aviv Umfutat Aviv. Rabbi Yehuda says it's Asur. Amarav Gidel Amarav, my ta'am ad Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda that he says it's Asur? Tichtiv, it says in the pasuk, Lo yikach ish et eshet aviv velo yigale kenaf aviv. It says, Lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. That's straightforward. A person cannot marry his father's wife. And then it says, Lo yigale kenaf aviv. So that part of the pasuk is not so clear. He shouldn't reveal the wing or corner of his father. What does that mean? Unclear. So Rabbi Yehuda makes a drasha. It says, Kenaf shera'a aviv lo yigale. The knaf, like the corner, it's like a knaf also is like a beged. Ufarasta kenafecha alea, it says by Ruth and Boaz. That's actually one of the places where we learn that chuppah is putting a beged over the chatan and kala together. But so kanaf shira'a aviv lo yigale. The kanaf means like the beged that his father used to cover something that was like covered up by his father. Lo yigale, he shouldn't reveal. So Rabbi Yehuda says this is talking about someone who his father raped, he can't be with. Umimai de ba'anusa ktiv. How do we know that it's talking about? Umimai danusa. How do we know that it's talking about an anusa, someone that his father raped? So Rabbi Yehuda says no. Mi'ilave dekra. We know it from the pasuk above it. A few psukim earlier, dichtiv, it says v'natan ha'ish hashochev ima la'avi anara chamishim kesef. It's talking about a case where somebody rapes a woman and he has to pay the father a fine. And then v'samich lei, and then next to it is lo yikach ish eshet aviv lo yikach kenaf aviv. So just like the previous pasuk was talking about a situation of rape, so too this pasuk also is talking about a situation of anusa, of rape, and it's talking about someone who his father took advantage of. So that's how we learn that it's asur to the son from smuchin. So you see Rabbi Yehuda, who generally does not make a drasha of smuchin, Boker Tov, Rabbi Yehuda, who generally does not make a drasha of smuchin, he still makes a drasha of smuchin in Sefer Dvarim. Clear? Good. Now, once we're involved in this Braita, the Gemara says, okay, what's the opinion of Rabbanan over here? Rabbanan, how come they don't agree to this drasha? So the Gemara says, if it was really right away attached, then we would agree. But hashda de lo samichle, now it's in our case, it's not really directly connected. There's a few words separating the case of anusa and those words lo yigale kanaf aviv. Why dichtiv lo yikach eshet aviv bentayim? The order of the psukim is first it talks about a case of ones, a case where somebody took advantage of a girl. He has to pay the father of the na'ara certain amount, chamishim kesef. That's the first pasuk. Then it says, don't marry father's wife, and then it says, lo yigale kanaf aviv. So that lo yikach eshet aviv, don't marry your father's wife, the Rabbanan say are separating, and you can't use smuchim over there. You can't say, well, they're next to each other, it's coming to teach me something. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care about that. It's in the same pasuk. There's a few words extra that are separating. Okay, fine, big deal. We still make a drasha of smuchim. So that's really the machloket here. But Rabbanan don't accept the drasha of smuchim. So what? How do Rabbanan learn the words lo yigale kenaf aviv? Meaning, according to Rabbi Yehuda, lo yigale kenaf aviv means don't be with your father's anusa. How do Chachamim learn that pasuk? So it says we're on the bottom of Daf Dalet Amud Aleph, few lines from the bottom, first wide line. B'shomeret yavam hakatuv medaber. It's talking about a shomeret yavam of the person's father. So basically, cases like this: the father has a woman who fell to him. His brother died. He has a woman who fell to him to do yibum. So the son is not allowed to marry the shomeret yavam of his father. V'la'avor alav b'shnei lavin, and it's coming to teach me that there's an additional isur, meaning not only the isur of lo tetzeh eshet amet achutza, that when she's waiting to do yibum you can't marry her, but additionally on top of that there's an isur of lo yigale kenaf aviv. So we're more on this later. The Gemara is going to explain really there's a few isurim here, more on this later, but let's just do a couple more lines. Uv Mishnah Torah mai ta'ama de darish. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't make a drush of smuchim everywhere else, but he does by Sefer Dvarim. So why? Why is Sefer Dvarim any different than the rest of Torah? Why is it by the rest of Torah when it comes to two psukim that are next to each other, he says, no, I'm not making a drasha here. I'm not saying do skila by mechashefa because two psukim are next to each other, but when it comes to Mishneh Torah, Sefer Dvarim, he does. So why is that? So ibaitema mishum de mukach, either because it's mukach, which means from the fact that the psukim are ordered in this way, it must be that it's coming to teach me a drasha. There's no other flow and no other reason for these psukim to be next to each other. Therefore, it must be that it's coming to teach me a certain drasha. Mishum de mufni, or the reason is because it's mufni. It's available, meaning there's no other reason for the repetition of this pasuk. The pasuk is entirely extra. So the Gemara is gonna get into it a little bit more. Mishum de mukach. One understanding is because it's mukach, it must be because the reason that it's next to each other, there's no other reason that it's next to each other. Dimken lichteve rachmana gabe arayot. The Torah should have written this pasuk lo yikach eshet aviv lo yigale kenaf aviv by arayot. The fact that the Torah did not write it by arayot, it must be that it's coming to be next to this pasuk to teach me something. So it's mukach. There's no other reason for this pasuk to be here. It's completely out of place. So from the fact that it's here must be that it's being juxtaposed to something to teach me a halacha. So this pasuk lo yikach eshet aviv lo yigale kenaf aviv is completely out of place. So it's mukach. It must be that it's coming for some type of drasha. Mishum de mufni, or it could be because it's mufni, because it's available, meaning because the pasuk is extra, it's available to teach me a drasha. Dimken lichtov rachmana lo yikach ish et eshet aviv lo yigale kenaf aviv lamali. The whole word term lo yigale kenaf aviv is something additional and extra. So it must be it's coming to teach me a halacha. So lama lishma mina la'afnuye. We see from there that it's la'afnuye. It's extra to come to teach me that we darshan smuchim. So what we got out from here is what's the makor of ase lo doche lo tase from shatnez and tzitzit. It says lo tilba shatnez semer b'shtim yachtav gidilim ta'ase lach. Shatnez tzitzit. So we said even though to teach me that tzitzit overrides shatnez, even when in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit you have to violate shatnez, you do it. And then we said that we got into the drush of smuchim. We said everyone agrees in Mishnah Torah you darshan smuchim. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who elsewhere does not agree, but in Mishnah Torah he agrees that you darshan smuchim. And we said why is Mishnah Torah different? Either because it's mukach, the pasuk is written in this place, it's completely out of place, and it's here to teach me something, or because it's mufne, or because there are extra words in the pasuk that are extra to teach me that there's some drasha to be made here. Therefore, in Mishnah Torah, we darshan smuchim.